Hello everyone, dear viewers. Well, Europe is burning both literally and figuratively, and that's what we'll talk about today. Look, subscribe to the channel to catch the most interesting updates, and we can move on. Look, here we have Spain and France. These are just fire outbreaks in various places. Suddenly, because of the dry and hot weather, which keeps getting hotter, fires break out. And now they have engulfed Spain and France and have become some of the largest in the recent history of these countries. The area affected by these fires is so large that it would be enough for several micro-countries. The situation is stabilizing. They say, well, another heat wave is coming and it's just a few days away. There's hardly any time left. It could become a new source of problems. And not all the fires have been put out yet. Thousands of residents are being forced to evacuate from the outskirts of Madrid. This is Spain, of course. But on Wednesday, they slowly, little by little, started returning to their homes. The situation has improved a bit, but it must be said that unfortunately not everyone will be able to return to their homes. Because not everyone still has their homes, 24,000 evacuated citizens were able to return to their homes, and another 20,000 were no longer under lockdown in the autonomous community of Madrid. It looks something like this, and it's just crazy. In different places, the fires reach different intensities. And they occur spontaneously. Well, here's a person driving, you could say a real pig. He opens the car window. He throws out a half-burned cigarette. The butt is still smoldering. It falls on the roadside and sets fire to everything around it. And now everything catches fire just like that, with a snap of your fingers. Boom, and static electricity. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but for example. And it happens in other places too. Someone didn't put out the fire. Someone intends to do it. And for a fire to ignite in dry, hot weather, it doesn't take much time. It's literally a matter of seconds. Since the beginning of the year, a total of 207,000 hectares of land have burned across all of Spain. This is actually probably the worst on record in this beautiful country's entire history. In France, it's half as much, 92,000 hectares, and for France, this is also the worst on record. But not for the entire history, just for the past 2 decades. As for France, the rulers there are worried because all of this could flare up with renewed force. Thus, the authorities of the Gironde prefecture, which suffered the most from the forest fires, reported a second relatively calm night, but things could get worse. Currently, an orange weather alert is in effect everywhere, and in some areas, the air temperature reaches 41 degrees. The climate is getting warmer, all of this is getting worse, and naturally there could be fires. This is the perfect time to recommend my second science channel, where I talk about heat and all that stuff. There is a huge amount of different material here on various topics, from space to climate, and there's even some satire about all those Anunnaki, Nibiru, insectoids, flat earthers, pretty much everyone you can think of. And there's stuff about fat too. There's a lot here about fat. For example, there's a funny video called We'll All Burn. Here it is. And it explains what causes all this and why it happens. Plus, it also talks about the temperature catastrophe, and one of the latest videos is There is no life in space. Plus, it also talks about the ocean there. Well, but let's get back to Europe and race right through it. Scientists warn that the June heat which led to these fires is not the only one. And in general, the continent, as the British and Americans say, Europe is now heating up more than anywhere else. The continent is warming, and the further it goes, the worse and worse it will get, unfortunately. And of course, this concerns not only the climate or our living conditions, but also business and the economy. For example, this whole wildfire saga is already being called a mini-COVID. Wildfires in France, for instance, have affected as many as 40,000 people. The Bordeaux-Gironde Chamber of Commerce and Industry compared the consequences of the largest wildfires in southwestern France to a new lockdown for businesses. Let me remind you, the lockdown affected a huge number of companies, especially those involved in the hotel business, restaurants, and everything else related to interacting with people, travel, and other aspects. In the city where I lived at that time, also in Spain, a huge number of restaurants went bankrupt, even those that had been operating there for literally hundreds of years. French businesses are also at risk and continue to suffer increasingly serious losses due to one of the most severe fires. So, 40,000 companies were affected by the fire. That's about 200,000 jobs even for France's multi-million population. But this is no joke. We're experiencing an unprecedented situation. It's like a mini COVID. This is an economic disaster for our companies, which are already suffering from the current situation, said the president of the Bordeaux-Gironde Chamber of Commerce and Industry. 130,000 employees are currently unable to work because of the fires. And the chamber warns that tourism companies, which earn about 80% of their annual turnover during the summer season, may find themselves in an extremely difficult situation. Campsites and hotels that were located in the middle of the forest and marketed themselves as nature-friendly have been evacuated. Yes, that's a huge part of it. On top of everything, there are also problems with energy. In France, for example, the regional energy grid required adjustments from the national main power grid operator. Plus, some power lines and substations have been shut down to allow firefighters to work in safe conditions. Well, as of 1:30 p.m. on Wednesday, which is the time this video is being recorded, there have been no disruptions in the main power grid due to the fires. But that doesn't mean there can't be any. Of course, I don't want to be a fortune teller, but the situation is really extremely difficult. As for Spain, it also seems like they're already finishing up the fight against the fires. And the Prime Minister of Spain, Sanchez, says that progress is clearly being made, and a lot has been achieved in the fight against the largest fire in Spain's history. But by the way, he criticized the denial of climate change. Well, it's clear here that the climate is changing. By the way, again, from a scientific point of view, the disagreement isn't about whether the climate is changing, but about the causes. So, maybe it's not necessarily human activity that's the main cause, but other factors, and this activity is only the third or fourth most significant factor. Anything is possible. In short, now the country is starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I can confirm many fires are really being put out. But according to Sanchez, maximum caution must be exercised. Another heat wave is starting in the country, which will complicate the fight against the fire and increase the risks of new forest fires in most parts of the country. Although the situation with some of the largest hotspots is improving, it is still too early to relax these precautions. Here, in many provinces, the fight against the fire continues. The consequences of the fires have affected almost 100,000 people. In such autonomous communities as Castile and León, Madrid, Castile-La Mancha, Comunitat Valenciana and Barcelona. Well, in general, in very many places. The night operations turned out to be effective, but difficulties remain. Nevertheless, the evacuation order has been lifted in 13 municipalities, and that's extremely good. But there are other fires too. But these are no longer natural or fire-related, but economic. The thing is, now Europe suddenly has a problem with the US. This has never happened before, and here we go again. And the agreement of that very Ursula von der Leyen, which many European figures opposed with the US, is also in question. Here's what it says. They are threatening to impose new tariffs. How serious they are is not yet clear. But the fact that the trade agreement between the European Union and the US is having problems is true. For example, the agreement has encountered problems. These primarily arise because the European Union is fining IT companies. The fines on American tech companies are enormous. For example, the European Commission imposed a fine of 890 million euros, and Trump, as they say, was furious. He immediately explained and accused the EU of using unfair trade practices, and he stated that the US would conduct an investigation. Then he himself started having problems there. But the worst part is that even the few beneficial points contained in this contract. Let me remind you that Europe commits not to use about $800 billion there for purchasing weapons, and another $600 billion or so for purchasing energy resources, so there's really nothing particularly pleasant for Europe there. But even what is there is already getting worse. The United States has stated that America is not a piggy bank for Europe, and we will not allow it to be one. Trump stated that an investigation is already starting. And the federal government will have the opportunity to counter what he called unfair trade practices by foreign countries. And the Europeans got it, as we are told. A lot of threats from Trump on social media, but in general, we're all used to it by now. You know, it's like that Hormuz Strait thing, closed, open, open, closed. Well, in general, it's all familiar. Oil, in fact, is going up in price, then it drops a little, but it doesn't drop much, and gasoline, diesel, gas condensate, and everything else. They aren't really dropping much either, that is, they're not getting much cheaper, they just fluctuate a little up and down, sometimes a bit more up and down, so that's how things are. Electricity and many other things are naturally getting more expensive. In short, the problem is that on May 19th, the EU and the European Parliament agreed to lift tariffs on goods from the US starting July 1, but lawmakers insisted on including protective mechanisms in the agreement. And now, if something happens, they can even suspend the agreement. If the US ignores the fixed tariff rate of 15%, or if they undermine the access of EU economic entities to the United States market. Who in the EU is actually lobbying for this rejection of this strange agreement? Well, actually, there are quite a lot of such companies, naturally. This all concerns big business. But the European Commission arranged for the new tariffs on the US to be set at 10%. Although they were supposedly introduced due to insufficient EU action to ban the import of goods produced using forced labor. If digital services from the EU come under attack, nothing good will come of it, and now they're telling us the following. Now, we are much more confident than a year ago. But again, this has never happened before. And here we go again. I don't see this confidence. The problem is huge. And fine, that's the whole European Union, but for example, with that very Pacta Pactagenos Mectem, it's a huge problem. He is being predicted to resign, and they say he has almost no authority. And the government's failed communication about the reshuffle led to confrontation, even within his own party. And Merz is going through the deepest crisis within his own party. A crisis of trust is to blame for everything, against the backdrop of the government's record low popularity. A lot of people are dissatisfied with them. Just 3/4 of all residents and members of the government. Even aliens from other planets are dissatisfied with Merz. The situation in this party is more serious than in the late 90s. Back then there was a problem with secret donations. Well, now there don't seem to be any donations at all, at least not obvious ones, but there might be secret ones, but they haven't been discovered yet if they exist. But there is a crisis of trust and illogical, unclear, inconsistent decisions. These lead to an increasingly worsening situation for Germany itself from an economic point of view and for all of Europe as well. This is real, and it is very obvious. The Chancellor is criticized for not really using his authority to improve the situation within his own party, on top of that. But they allocate billions of euros which just go to waste, and in the end, the Minister of Transport resigns, and then they just rearrange the beds in that same brothel, so to speak. In other words, nothing good is happening there. Right now, the Social Democrats are so popular that their rating is as high as 12 or even 14%. That's just a huge amount. But still, before coming to power, the bloc used to get over 30% in polls, and that's definitely a problem now. As a result of the early elections, the Conservatives fell below that mark. But as for resignation, no one is willing to make any predictions yet. The only time there was a resignation like that was in '74. But until then, it hadn't really happened. That's the only case. Gerhard Schröder was forced to step down as party leader when something went wrong with the reforms. Now, of course, everything is fine, everything is good, everything is excellent. Germans are starting to live better and better. For example, BMW is growing. But at the same time, thousands of jobs are being cut. I've already talked about how the largest company, Varta, declared bankruptcy. The Saudis are involved there too. Not everything is going well for many other companies either. But for example, Mercedes is surprisingly starting drone production. So many companies are shifting from civilian orders which are now unprofitable, especially since Chinese cars are taking up a bigger share of the market. Pushing out the expensive German ones. For example, the latest BMW model, right? They said it's just like the Chinese cars, but many times cheaper. So why do we need a Boeing wing that costs as much as a Boeing wing? If we have decent electric cars for 30 to 35,000 euros packed with so many features that the only thing missing is a massage function, or maybe it even has that, we just haven't found the button yet. Anyway, they're planning to cut BMW jobs worldwide, 8,000 positions by 2027. In Germany, they're offering employees options. They're making offers. A compensation program for voluntary resignation, but nobody really wants to leave because these companies have raised a whole generation. And in Germany, they will carry out the layoffs through natural employee turnover, as well as by offering the compensation program primarily to those who agree to leave the company. As for the compensation, it will run from October 2026 until the end of 2027, and this program is intended for everyone. Employees in Germany, except for those who are directly involved in production. And how much money will be allocated is still unclear. But there is one more nuance. This is what I was talking about regarding the war. If things are going badly for you, put money into war and everything will immediately get better for you. That's how it is in the EU. They strive to speed up companies' access to innovations from research labs. And when you read this, you think, oh wow, science is advancing, technology is great. But it turns out this is simply a machine of death. They tell us that the new voluntary charter is supposed to help startups and small businesses test their products in advanced European laboratories and pilot centers. The European Commission has approved this very charter, and now small startups and big startups will be able to use all their developments somewhere out there. Oh, and we also have a broader initiative here. The goal is to make the bloc a leader, meaning European directions in the world, for launching and growing tech companies, but as we saw with you at the announcement, what's going on there? This very one. It's about development, this very scientific and technological progress. Everything is connected to war. Well, and maybe as an epigraph already. To all of this, or rather not an epigraph, but the end of the epigraph. That's a little different. Let's use this material. Right now in Europe, a warlike scenario is really taking shape, and fiery clouds in France as well. These clouds are covering our future too. And anything European as well. All of this is clear? Not literally, but rather as a comparison, so to speak. Nevertheless, it's a common metaphor. But it's very interesting to look at this natural phenomenon, these severe forest fires in France. The authors, let's say, they shaped it. Cumulonimbus clouds. These are thunderstorm fire clouds that create new ignition points. Well, usually a cloud by itself is seen as something that brings coolness or shade, but here that's not the case at all. Here, the cloud produces lightning even though it's cooling down. As a result, dry lightning occurs. That means it doesn't reach the ground, so nothing gets cooled down. And the lightning just strikes the dry grass and creates new fire outbreaks. And by the way, in Spain as well, dry thunderstorms are actually not that uncommon. If they become more frequent, everyone will have huge problems. In general, let's hope that all this will be resolved. As they say, there's no such thing as bad weather. Let's hope that nature will help all of us. And the problems will resolve themselves one fine day, and they will get involved and adapt. In general, phrase it however you like. Goodbye, everyone.